The house on Bleakmore Hill. The moon hung low in the sky, a thin crescent barely visible behind the clouds that seemed to swallow the stars. The air was unnaturally still, almost suffocating, as though the earth itself were holding its breath. Around the campfire, the group of friends sat in silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound to break the heavy quiet of the woods. But even the fire's warmth couldn't cut through the oppressive chill in the air. Ben leaned forward, his face half illuminated by the dancing flames. "You've heard the legends?" he said, his voice almost too loud in the stillness. "The stories about haunted houses, cursed places. But there's one, a place, a house that no one dares speak of. Not in the town, not even in the surrounding villages. The house on Bleakmore Hill." The others exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued. Even the skeptics among them shifted slightly, their eyes widening as the words hung in the air like the weight of an ancient warning. "Is this a ghost story?" Claire asked, her voice tinged with skepticism, though she couldn't completely mask the flicker of unease in her eyes. She'd always been the level-headed one, the one who dismissed the supernatural tales with a smile and a roll of her eyes. But tonight, with the fire casting strange shadows and the wind whispering through the trees, something in her seemed to hesitate. "Oh, it's a real ghost story," Ben replied, his tone turning serious. "But not the kind you hear about in books. This one, it's different. It's a story about something that's not supposed to be forgotten." For a moment, the fire crackled, and the wind sighed through the trees, as though the forest itself was waiting for the tale to begin. Ben turned to Claire, nodding slowly. "You want to hear it?" Claire swallowed, her heartbeat quickening. "Sure," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. Ben leaned back, staring into the flames as if seeing something that wasn't there. "This is the story of the house on Bleakmore Hill. The house no one talks about. The house that people disappear into. The house on Bleakmore Hill." It had been a dreary, rainy afternoon when Michael first heard of Bleakmore Hill. He was sitting in a small local cafe in the town of Greystone, a quiet village on the edge of a dense forest. Michael had always been fascinated by old homes, abandoned places, and the stories that lingered in their walls. When he overheard a conversation between two elderly men at a nearby table, he couldn't help but listen. "I wouldn't go up there if I were you," one of them said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "You don't mess with that place, not anymore." Michael looked up, his curiosity piqued. "What's up on Bleakmore Hill?" The man shook his head, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he sipped his tea. "It's an old mansion, been empty for decades, but something still lives there. I don't know what it is, but the people who go up there don't come back. The place, it's cursed. No one ever stays long enough to find out why." The second man nodded grimly. "My cousin went up there once, when he was younger. They say he saw a woman in a black dress, standing at the top of the stairs. When he tried to leave, the door wouldn't open. When he finally got out, he was different, quiet, like something had gotten inside him." Michael, an architect and lover of historic buildings, couldn't resist the challenge. He'd heard of cursed houses before, places where tragedy seemed to cling to every stone. But he believed in restoration, in the idea that the past could be reclaimed, that an old house could still hold potential. And so, when he heard that Bleakmore Hill's mansion was for sale, he didn't hesitate. He bought it, The house was everything Michael had hoped for. It was old, dating back to the 1800s, and in a state of disrepair, but it had a charm that couldn't be ignored. The architecture was grand, with tall, narrow windows, ornate carvings along the door frames, and a sweeping staircase that wound its way up to the second floor. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling, and the ceiling stretched high above, crowned with intricate moldings. Michael could already envision the place restored to its former glory. He moved in with his wife, Eva, and their 2 children, Lily and Max, eager to begin the project. The town had told him not to buy the house, but Michael had heard the rumors of the mansion's curse and dismissed them. He was a man of reason, a man who believed that hard work and vision could overcome any obstacle. But soon, things began to change. At first, it was subtle. Strange sounds at night. Creaking floorboards, the faint sound of footsteps echoing down empty hallways. Michael chalked it up to the house settling, as old buildings often did. But then, it got worse. Eva began to see things. Shadows in the corners of rooms, figures moving behind her when she turned. Lily, their youngest, began to speak of a woman, tall and thin, with pale skin and a black dress, who would visit her in the middle of the night. The woman would stand at the foot of Lily's bed, staring down at her, though her face was always hidden in shadow. Max, their older son, grew distant. At first, he tried to ignore the oddities, but over time, he became withdrawn, often found staring into the dark corners of the house, as though waiting for something or someone. One night, Michael found him standing in front of the large, ornate mirror in the hallway, his face blank, his eyes unfocused. When Michael asked him what he was doing, Max simply said, "She's waiting." At night, the house felt alive. The temperature dropped, even in the middle of summer, and the walls would hum with a low vibrating sound. The air felt thick, heavy, with an oppressive presence that seemed to follow them wherever they went. And then came the dreams. Michael began having vivid nightmares of a woman in a black dress, standing at the top of the staircase. Every time he tried to reach her, to ask her who she was, she would vanish, only to appear again further down the hallway, always beckoning him. Eva had similar dreams. The children, too, spoke of the woman, how she would stand in the doorway of their rooms, watching them in silence. And one night, the house did something that none of them could explain. It was late, past midnight, when Michael woke to the sound of someone crying. At first, he thought it was Eva, but when he turned over, he saw her lying next to him, fast asleep. The crying grew louder, coming from the hallway outside their bedroom. Michael hesitated for a moment, his heart racing. Then he slowly got out of bed and crept into the hallway. The house was dark, too dark. The shadows clung to the walls, and the only light came from the pale moonlight filtering through the dusty windows. The crying was coming from upstairs. When Michael reached the top of the staircase, he froze. There, standing at the end of the hall, was the woman in the black dress. Her face was hidden in shadow, but he could see her, tall, thin, her long hair cascading down her back like a dark veil. "Who are you?" Michael whispered, though his voice was barely audible. The woman turned toward him slowly, her movements unnervingly deliberate. As she took a step toward him, he felt the air around him grow colder, the temperature dropping sharply. "Leave." The voice was not a whisper, but a command, spoken in a language he couldn't understand. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The woman raised her hand slowly, and Michael felt an intense pressure in his chest, as if an invisible force were crushing him. Without thinking, he turned and ran. The next morning, Michael told Eva everything, though he knew she would never believe him. But when he turned to look at the house from the window, he saw something he couldn't explain. A shadow in the window of the top floor, watching him, staring. And that was the moment he knew. The house was alive. Claire finished the story in a whisper, her voice trembling with the memory of it. The fire crackled louder, but the warmth it offered seemed distant, far removed from the cold that had settled deep into their bones. Ben's face was grim, his eyes wide with unease. The others sat in stunned silence, their minds struggling to make sense of the terrifying tale. "What happened to them?" Alex asked, his voice barely a murmur. Claire shook her head slowly. "No one knows. They left the house, but not in the way they expected. Some say they're still out there, wandering the woods around Bleakmore Hill. Others say the house took them." She paused, her eyes locking with each of theirs, her voice quiet but certain. "And if you go up there, it will take you to..." The fire crackled, a gust of wind stirring the leaves around them. For a moment, it felt as though the very woods themselves were listening, waiting. The shadows stretched further, and the night seemed deeper, darker. And somewhere, in the distance, a whisper seemed to echo through the trees. "Lee."